Oversight Committee. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I've been notified that Assemblymember Arnold has given apologies, Assemblymember O'Connell, and we have substitutes from Assemblymember Devenish and Assemblymember Twycross. Thank you both for attending. Are there any further apologies that I'm not aware of?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members, and are there any other disclosable peculiar interests that you want to declare at this time?
No.
Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 19th of March be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 4 is a summary list of actions. Can we note the completed and outstanding actions arising from the previous meetings of the Oversight Committee? Okay, item 5, first substantive item of business, is the review of the post-regrading policy. Chief Officer, Mary, would you like to introduce the paper?
Certainly, thank you very much. Our discussions over the last couple of meetings about the proposed regrading in the HR team, to which we will return the next paper, but those discussions have raised some concerns about our regrading policy. And so a couple of meetings ago I said I would have a look at it, a quick look at it, to see whether there was anything obvious that we needed to be thinking about. And I am proposing in this paper what I call a direction of travel, but 3 emerging recommendations about things that we should tighten up, really is probably the best way of describing it. So at 4.13, 3 recommendations there. None of them change our policy as such, but I think we could usefully be much more explicit about these 3 areas. A business case for the regrading, potentially taking a panel approach to the regrading decisions as opposed to keeping them just within HR, and also making it a requirement where if we think that the incumbent of the post is going to move with the regrading upwards, that we are much clearer, that the do a much clearer check that the accountabilities at the higher level are being met. There are some further changes we might make, which would be more of a departure from our current policy, but I think a number of those are tied into the pay and grading review issues. So I suggest we park those until I'm clearer on the case for a pay and grading review. And I'm already doing that work following a previous discussion with you all.
Okay, any member? Assemblymember Devenish.
Mary, forgive me because I'm not on this committee full time, but when I've done this kind of thing in borough local government before, restructuring and grading has run completely in parallel. It doesn't seem to be doing so in this case, unless I read the papers wrongly. Why?
There's a lot of regrading that happens here, separate from any real restructuring work. And I think a lot of that, we believe, is to do with the fact that the pay and grading structure hasn't been reviewed for 15 years. So job descriptions haven't been reviewed, structures haven't been reviewed. Why we're having this discussion now is, in fact, on the HR side, regrading and restructuring was being mixed up in not a very explicit way. So part of what we're trying to do is make it clear that actually when regrading is happening separately, this more robust process must apply.
But if
so it can be with or without a full restructure.
Okay, and I know this is very difficult. I don't teach my you how to do your job, but effectively, when I've done it in the past, we've done it on large charts like the thing at the back there, and we've tried to overlay the two very much because otherwise something gets missed. And it is a chicken before the egg, I appreciate, but I think it would certainly help because I'm looking at these papers afresh, not having been on the committee more than once before, and I found them very not clear is probably the best way of putting it.
Okay, Senator Twycross.
I just had a question because one of the things that the paper said was that more senior roles are more frequently regraded, and I just wondered whether you'd done analysis of the demographics and whether the current system, which sounds a bit informal to be honest, having read the paper, means that it's been the process we've got now has been contributing to the gender and BME pay gap as a result of it being the more senior roles that are sort of going for it, because the people are being self-selective in how they're putting themselves forward, and traditionally there would be an expectation that it would potentially, I haven't seen figures, potentially be more likely to be men who might put themselves regrading. So I just wondered whether you'd done an analysis of that.
I haven't done the analysis. I mean, the concern about the potential for more junior people not putting themselves forward has come up through Unison colleagues. Yeah. They've expressed that. I mean, I haven't double checked whether that's right or wrong, because of the informal nature of this, and the sort of the sense that a lot of it's sort of self-started by the employee. I suspect they're right. And so, I mean, I could go back and do the analysis. I was more interested in making sure that going forward it's more robust.
I just wondered whether you'd done it, because it just sort of struck me as something that could reinforce issues that have already been identified.
I haven't done the analysis, but you may be right.
A couple of things for me, Mary. Your second recommendation, they consider introducing a panel approach to regrading, I think is fine. You've made the point about putting Unison on it. Who else would sit on these panels?
Sorry, Gary?
Who else would sit on these panels?
Well, I think that's partly what we need to just... If you're happy with us, we take this approach, we will make some decisions about that. I think the important thing is that people who sit on these panels will have to be properly trained and will have to be consistent members on these panels. Otherwise, you go back to the problem that I think, some of the problems we're trying to get away from. There are different models in different places. I did look a little bit more at this. So some places keep it to, in effect, Unison colleagues and HR. Others...
And HR, you see.
And HR. Others open it up. So they've got representatives from across the organisation on the panels. Again, where I've worked before, we've done that, make sure that there's, there are people from, say across the directorates represented in the GLA, and also at different levels of seniority across the directorates as well. I guess the main push here is to make sure that we make this process feel fair, and probably the best way to do that is to make it more transparent than it is now.
Well, that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, but I'm quite keen to talk to Unison colleagues about that. We've done some work, I hope it comes through this paper, looking at what else happens across the GLA group as well. And, we'll go back to that as well and see who does what for the panels. But certainly in principle, I'm absolutely up for a broader panel that brings together representatives from across the GLA, as long as people are prepared to commit to some of the time that would need.
So will you be bringing this back then to the committee to update us on that?
If you're interested in, of course I will.
Well, I think so.
Yep.
I mean, I accept that the purpose of this is to throw some transparency into the process, and I think that that's fine. And I think the three recommendations you've made are also fine. But I think that the panel, we really need to know a lot more about that, about who's on it, how it's going to work, what consistency is applied across the organisation, etc. Okay. I think that's very important, and I do think it will need to come back. The other thing is, which I think also the committee would probably want to take a view on, is the financial implications of this. You've included on paragraph 7.1, you've noted that this could have some financial implications, and detailed financial implications would have to be approved for regrading. I think that needs to come back as well, because any regrading, the regrading is going to go up, isn't it? It's not going to go down.
They don't go down.
Which means more cost to the taxpayer, and I think the committee needs to know about that in advance before decisions are taken. So I think that we'll have to get a paper back on that as well, because we can't just give a blanket agreement to everything that happens if there's going to be significant additional cost.
Okay. I think if anything, well, so I guess you're working on the basis that the number of regradings we do will go up as a result of this. Well, I'm not sure that's going to
fine. If that's not going to happen, that's fine, but we do need to know the financial implications of decisions that we make, so I think it will have to come back here for members to make an informed decision. Otherwise it's a blank cheque. Okay.
But you're happy. But what you're happy with, as I understand it, then is that we put these recommendations into play.
Mm-hmm. I am subject to more transparency about who sits on panels.
Okay.
I mean, if the panel equals one HR person and one trade union representative, personally, I'm not happy with that.
Okay.
and I'd like to know and have transparency in advance who would qualify to sit on those panels.
Okay.
Are members content with that? Subject to those observations and comments, we are recommended to note the report and the subsequent discussion. Do we agree to do that?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Right, item 6 is the proposed changes to the GLA Establishment, Human Resources and Organisational Development Unit. Those members who were here in January, or I say here, I mean upstairs in the chamber in January, will remember this paper and the discussion that followed. Mary, you're going to introduce this paper as well?
Yes, thank you. So when we brought this paper to you before, with regard to these 3 proposed grade 8 posts, you all had some significant concerns. And I hope I've tried in this paper to acknowledge those concerns and say actually the way that these jobs were presented and the mixture actually to the earlier point of regrading and restructuring wasn't helpful. And I think we've taken some of those concerns directly into the regrading policy paper that we've just discussed. However, I've set out in this paper more detail about the grade 8 roles and the grade 10 roles, and I would like now to proceed with recruiting to the grade 8 roles, acknowledging that the way this was set out to the committee in the first place was not as it should have been. However, the demands in the HR team, I think, really require those posts. I've tried also to be clearer in this paper that we are looking at a substantial restructure of the HR team. That's what we've said we'll do as part of the transformation work, and we will do that. I'm worried perhaps in the last discussions that's got a little bit lost. So I'm not saying that these new roles are the answer to a sort of more fit-for-purpose HR team. We need to do that work separately. But I do feel we need to go ahead with these posts. But acknowledge that all the concerns that the committee had were absolutely right.
Okay, it seems something we want to develop.
Can I just, a couple of questions, some of it on the wider review, some of it not. So the start off at 10, if I can begin. Will this review give us a better performance outcome from this group of, this section of staff, to be honest? That was my primary concern and issues that I've raised. So our performance issues, have you reconsidered some of those, not just about this, but the overall performance of this group of staff to the GLA and particularly to the London Assembly, because I think it was poor. So I'll maintain that because I've seen no other evidence presented to me to otherwise to say it wasn't. So on performance, where are we? Do you think it does deliver the review in its total and your accompanying decisions?
So the review of the business partner model and the advisors underneath. So I think there are 2 things there. We need more resource in that line to deal with the volume of work. That should help the quality of the work that's then delivered because there'll be more people available to do it. I think the more substantive question about are we going to get the quality of work from the people in the team. I've had some detailed conversations with the business partners who will be managing those people and have made it clear that I will also be very interested to hear about the performance improvements in that team. And I've made it clear that if I get feedback where things aren't as they should be, then I'll be wanting to know why.
Okay. And in terms of the previous item we've just discussed, we are very clear, just so you understand where members were coming from, because I have some issues with what you say in 1.4. I've never raised, and I don't think any members around the table ever raised there wasn't a need for your grade 10s or extra additional work around this area, because I think that was demonstrated in the report. So members weren't raising that. Members were raising the issues which whether it was a practice of this organisation of not, of doing a re-evaluation. Again, members had no problems with re-evaluations, bearing in mind Gareth Bacon, in terms of what's the bottom line, the cost issues, which we should always take into account. We've got no problem. If people deserve a regrading and it's demonstrated in there, members are supportive of that. What they're not supportive of is when you know there's a review, you do the regrading first, and surprise, surprise, people then get slotted into the post, denying the organisation actually choice and competition, call it what you like, denying choice. And so I just want to be clear that you understood why we raised those issues, and just really about that issue in 1.4. We weren't questioning whether these posts were required or not. I think the evidence was there, was about how it came about, and we realise, because you've given us the information, that it wasn't just a practice in these circumstances, it was something across the board.
Okay, no, I do realise that. And I think, also, I think this closer attention to regrading going forward, as we talked about in the last paper, will mean that the corporate management team is much more aware of where regrading and restructuring is coming together in a way that which we won't allow going forward.
Okay, no further questions from me.
Thank you. Assembly Member Davis.
Mary, I'm sorry to be difficult, but I agree with every word that A.M. Duval has just said, and I don't think when you responded to him, you've convinced me that performance will improve by doing what you're suggesting. So could you start by trying to convince us that if we are spending more money, if we are upgrading people, that performance will at least improve in some measurable way?
So, in each of the business partner teams so far, we've in effect had one HR advisor post. This puts in another advisor post into each, which at least gives the team a fighting chance of dealing with the volume of work that they've got. That in itself is going to help improve the performance because they are overwhelmed at the moment. The second thing there, of course, then is about who we get into those jobs. So we create the jobs that we need, and then we need to appoint into them. And so the grade 8 appointments haven't yet happened. The grade 10 regrades are the ones we've been talking about before. And as Assembly Member Duval has asked me to do, I'm going to make sure that we get the best possible performance out of the people in those grade 10s.
And how will you measure that?
Well, we know some of the things that have been going wrong. So I've been clear with the team that the quality of the advice given to both members of the Assembly but also members of staff must improve. That's relatively easy to measure.
Okay, I still feel it's rather inward looking. I will remind you, a few years ago the BBC got into a lot of trouble when they did their HR because, again, it was all about what happened in the building rather than what we will see, what London will see in this case in terms of outputs. Can I move on, though, to a slightly separate point? I think many people would accept the GLA, dare I say it, I've got, and this is quite right, I've got family-friendly terms and conditions. The hours of work are not, compared to many other areas, particularly onerous. You could say they're a bit like teachers. They work hard when they're here, but when they're not, they're quite rightly on holiday. How have you fed those kind of family-friendly terms and conditions into how you're going to recruit so we do get the best people and effectively we don't effectively overpay for these positions?
Well, the positions are the grade they are. Our family-friendly policies apply to everybody who's appointed. So I'm afraid I don't quite understand the question.
Well, I think the question is you're upgrading the roles.
Mm-hmm.
So they are jobs that I think you talked about earlier. You basically said that you weren't sure whether the people you recruited could do the job. The numbers you've got now can't do the job because they're overworked, so you're going to have more people. Mm-hmm. You should be able to get some very talented Londoners to apply for these jobs.
Yes, I agree.
How are you going to broadcast the fact that this is a family-friendly place to work and people should apply and they join the team?
Well, unless somebody can contradict me, I think we do that with all our recruitment. Make it clear that some of our, the policies that we have apply. I mean, we are doing some extra work on thinking about how we make sure that people understand, the type of place the GLA is to work. But I don't think we have a problem in communicating some of our, the family-friendly part of the position. You've got people sitting here who are job sharing. Most of us have children under 11.
I think my point I was making more is more to do with the fact that the GLA is not known by a lot of Londoners. So if you're trying to get people to...
yes.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay. So I think we are doing a lot of work at the moment to try and extend the pools of candidates who apply for all of our jobs. These will be no different. Because I think what we do see is, particularly in terms of sometimes gender, but often various diverse characteristics of diversity, not enough applicants coming through at application stage, long list stage and short list stage. So we're doing more work to do to make more people aware of the jobs that we have got in the GLA, mainly through the transformation programme. So that's a broader push, something that these jobs will benefit from, but not something we would do particularly for these jobs.
Okay, I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, members. Unless anyone else has anything else they want to ask on this, we are recommended to note the report and subsequent discussion. Do we agree to do so? Okay, that is therefore approved. Item 7 is the conversion of fixed-term posts to permanent posts. Again, Mary.
So I came to you in February to explain the principles of our work, to check that the fixed-term posts that we have a substantial number, whether or not some of them should indeed be permanent posts because they are in effect permanent posts in the structure. So we established some principles for that when I saw you last, and I said I would come back with a first set of recommendations to you, and these first 24 are here. We've done a lot of analysis in the past few weeks. I do intend to bring another list back in June because we've been doing some very careful work around the nature of the roles and, of course, with Martin sitting on the end there, the funding available for the roles. Because I've always said we can only come back with these posts if they have no financial impact over and above the budget only just adopted last week. So these are the 24 we're proposing to you initially, and we've got Debbie and Emma and Sarah here as well, because most of the roles do fall into their directorates. So if there were questions particularly about the roles, they're going to answer those. But I would like to come back in June with a further set, because we haven't been able to do all the analysis we wanted to do in time for this meeting, but I didn't want to leave people in these fixed term posts waiting any longer, because these ones seem to us very clear cut.
Okay. I've seen 3 Assembly members so far, and I've got a couple of questions myself, if we don't get to them. In order, it would be Assembly members Copley, Devonish and then Prince. Assembly member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Mary, I believe you've been in our head of office, and the Labour group has been in contact with you about a particular post. Happens to be my RSO, who was not included in this despite completely fitting all of the criteria. Now, I'm glad to hear that there'll be another list coming back in June, but I'm just wondering why that post wasn't included here, given it completely fits the criteria.
So I'm told, because I looked into it on Friday afternoon, that it was an issue of timing, although I don't quite understand that. We've got a corporate management team session this afternoon on the next tranche. So having looked at it and having spoken to Beth Cushion on Friday, it seems to me completely clear that that one is going to come forward in June. I mean, I think we've talked about it before. Some of our data related to posts, fixed-term posts and other posts, it's getting better. But because we haven't put the spotlight on fixed-term posts before quite as we're doing now, there's been some significant effort to pull all the right data together. So I think that might be part of the issue. We did also set ourselves some parameters in the original paper that talked about if people were in permanent positions but on fixed term posts, they were excluded. So we made it a little complicated for ourselves. I know that doesn't apply in this one. But I say here we think there'll be another list, probably of similar size, coming through to June. And I can assure you that that one is on that draft list.
I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Okay, so Member Devonish.
Mary, have you, or will you share the workings of how you've come up with your figures, obviously without mentioning the names of the individuals holding the posts, at least privately to this committee?
In terms of
the basic arithmetic of how you've put together the fact that the fixed costs come to X and the cost for the full-time role under the LGPS comes to Y.
So are you asking whether pension costs are included in fixed term?
I'm asking Chair, if they will share the workings so we can have complete transparency of whether they had included everything. But my substantive point is the point the Chair has made.
Right.
I'm going to have to defer to Martin.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. So, forgive me. We can share the costs for all the grades of these posts, including on costs.
Fixed term versus permanent?
They are the same. We pay staff on fixed term contracts the same as staff on permanent contracts. Where staff, so it is the same.
So there's no additional cost because, am I wrong, are the latter and the former both included under the LGPS?
Yes. Anyone who joins, comes as an employee of the GLA, regardless of their contract, is eligible to join the LGPS.
So you're sure there's no additional cost from moving to fixed term to a permanent position over a period of 4 years, 8 years, etc.?
If there was someone who had not joined the pension scheme and then opted to join the pension scheme, and I don't know who's in the pension scheme or not, if they changed their decision or decided to leave, there will be a variation in those individual circumstances. But by and large, all our staff opt in to join the pension scheme. If you get a 2-year contract, people will join the pension scheme.
And from a budgetary position, presumably, you'll include the on-costs anyway.
We budget for all posts that people are in the local government pension scheme.
Right. That makes sense.
We don't make any allowance for people who don't join the pension scheme, because by and large, I don't know the exact percentage, but it would be very high, 90%. It wouldn't be far short of 100% staff join the pension scheme. It would be the exception. So for budgeting, we budget on the basis that everyone is in the pension scheme because they're entitled to be in the pension scheme.
I have to say, having done this for 14 years in detail on Westminster City Council, I find what you've said unlikely, but I'd love to see the figures. That's why I would like to see the figures and go through them line by line.
I'm very happy to look into if any of these individuals haven't joined the pension scheme and inform you.
Thank you.
Okay. Same with Member Prince.
Thank you. Mary, if we're employing people on fixed term posts and we then make them into permanent members of staff, is there not more cost if we want to then subsequently delete that post?
No. Not if they've been with us for more than 1 year.
You're entitled to their normal redundancy, the same as a permanent member of staff.
But is it not a fixed term post?
Sorry?
Is it not a fixed term post?
Yes, but holders
Does
of...
that not mean that when you come to the end of that fixed term, you leave?
No. Even if people with fixed term posts are entitled to redundancy.
What, at the end of their contract?
At the end of their contract.
Look,
At the end of their contract.
Are you sure
yes,
about that?
correct.
So if I'm employed on a 2-year fixed term contract and I come to the end of that 2 years, I then get redundancy. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
So what's the point of a fixed term contract?
Well, that's some of the questions
Good question.
we've been asking ourselves. And particularly, that's due to relatively recent changes in employment law.
Sure.
And if a member of staff has been on, it could have been on a series of fixed term contracts and been here 4 years, they're entitled to a permanent contract.
Yeah.
That's reflecting recent changes in employment law.
So just out of interest then, if I come and work on a 2-year fixed term contract and my 2 years is finished, what happens then?
If you're not found alternative employment, if the contract, that the post is not extended, you'll be made redundant at the end of your contract.
Right.
I'd apply for that.
Yeah, sounds very good terms. Okay, so the other question is around all posts must have funding over the next 4 years. Could you explain the logic behind that, Mary?
Well, that linked to the fact that the budget has been set for the next, well, I guess in theory, for the next 4 years.
So budgets have been set for the next 4 years.
We look out 4 years constantly,
Yeah.
don't we? And that was the one of the criteria set for saying that these posts were fully funded.
Right.
So we weren't prepared to say, okay, we can see funding for the year, we'll make this permanent. That's not acceptable. We
Right,
need
so
to be
you're
able to
saying if you can
funding
see the funding for the year.
for 4 years.
No, but what you just said then, if you see the funding for 1 year but not going forward, that's not acceptable. Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Right. So see.
Yes. So it's only
So see the funding for 1 year, but no, not beyond that. That's not acceptable.
no. So all the 24 on here have funding in the base budget
Right.
for the next 4 years.
Okay, no,
That's really the difference. Is it in the base budget or is it?
Is it in the
on top?
base or not? Yeah.
Yeah. And so these 24 have funding in the base budget, and the ones in June, we are working through that question at the moment.
But as a general principle, if you can only just see how to afford a post for 1 year, but not for the ongoing 4 years, you think that's a bad decision to make?
Well, no, that's the difference between a fixed-term post and a permanent post.
Right.
Fixed-term posts often only do have money for.
Right. So,
1 year,
for a
2
permanent
year.
post, then you want to for a permanent post.
Well, the permanent post needs to be.
No, just this phrase. I'm just intrigued at where you get to. So you're saying for a fixed term post, if you can only see the funding for a year, but not for the 4 years, that's unacceptable. Did you say?
No, sorry. I said that to get on this list of 24,
Yeah.
we have to see the funding available in the base budget
Yeah.
for the next 4 years.
Right.
For any jobs that we can't see the funding in the base budget for a length of 4 years, won't make it on to the list recommended for conversion.
Right. So the principle is for any full-time normal job, if you haven't got if you can't see a 4-year funding, then it's foolish to do that.
Well, we're taking the view that's right. We shouldn't be
Okay,
converting those
but-
to permanent.
Works for me perfectly. Thank you. That's very logical. Thank you.
Assemblyman Deval.
I listened carefully to your earlier answer and the wider issues of why, and not being parochial, because I think there's a point I'm about to make about why the Labour group's post that met the criteria in a very clear way, why it's not part of the 24. I've just looked down the list of the 24, and they're all mayoral and corporate positions. Now, Mary, you're relatively new to the GLA. I can't help but think this is a bit of a cultural stroke attitudinal issue that we are second-class citizens, to be honest. I want some assurance from you about that we're not being treated that. I understand why mayoral bits might well be a priority. I can understand why some issues of corporate, but it was quite clear, the Labour group's post, when this next lot of posts come back of the next round and see where they are, I'd hate to think that they were all victims, not of the lack of research into these posts and whatever, is actually there is two parts of this organisation, and some get preference over others. I can't be more blunter than that.
Well, so you're right, there are no assembly jobs in this 24. There are some mayoral, the rest therefore support the mayoral administration. I mean, I think what I asked for to gather this together was for executive directors to look at their fixed term posts, propose those that they wanted to go forward for conversion, and then there was a process of checking against the principles and particularly the money that went on. As a result, we have these 24 in front of us. I certainly can absolutely assure you I haven't been through striking off any jobs from this. I've accepted those that have come up through the process through executive directors. But I will make sure that coming to June, if there are assembly jobs being recommended for conversion, they are on the list.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Sharp.
Mary partially answered my question, but for the sake of absolute clarity, having heard both Assembly Member Copley and Duval, can you please make sure that when you come back in June, that there's absolutely not a single post which remains unidentified, that we have a full list of, comprehensive list of posts which need to be considered, because it would be shame to have missed out after the review and everything that has been said at the end of the day.
So that is absolutely my intention, Assembly Member Shah, is to come back in June with the second half of the list, and then we're done, and then the fixed term posts can be deleted and the permanent posts can be established and the people in them can have certainty. I think, I expect there'll be a further, every so often there'll be a further set I need to bring to you as we create further jobs. But yes, between now and the June meeting, that is the plan.
Because we are not just talking about posts, we are talking about people who go through anxiety.
Exactly.
And it's important that the system is absolutely fair and transparent.
Yeah. That's why I really didn't want these 24 first ones to have to wait any longer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, final question from me, Mary. When we looked at this paper together in the call-over, it was 22 posts for conversion and 20 to come down the line. It's now 24 and 20. So I did a reconciliation between the paper that I got then and the paper that is before me now. And there were 3 posts included on this one that weren't before and 2 that were that now aren't. And they were both 0.6 of a post. And these ones, I'm assuming, all 1 full-time equivalent. What was the thinking there?
That is a post in the health team, which is a job share, so it's included now as just one post because it's less confusing.
Oh, okay.
Which post was that?
It's when it is the grade 9. It's one of the grade 9 policy officer posts.
Okay.
Basically, we wanted to be absolutely clear that we were making the whole job permanent and not one part of it, obviously.
So, if that's a job share, so what are the implications of that?
So it is currently, we have somebody in the post at 0.6, and pending this process we will be recruiting the other half of the job share. That will likely be recruited at another 0.6, so that will make it 1.2, and that will be accommodated within the health staffing budget.
All right, so it's a rounding thing rather than anything else?
Yes.
Okay. All right,
there
members.
were a couple of late entrants as well to the list, weren't there? But
well, there were, yes. There were 2. There's a grade 10 and a grade 9, both in the C&I directorate.
So the grade 10. I think that was just a simple error in the draft paper which we picked up. Hence why they've been added in. So those were 2 posts which meet the criteria, have funding in place, and so have been correctly included here.
So the correct figure then. So of the 87 fixed-term contract positions, you're going to be converting 44 of them to permanent, 24 now, and a further 20 at the June meeting?
The 24 now, around a further 20 in the June meeting, but we're still doing the work. We are still doing the work, particularly on the funding.
Okay, up to.
So I just wanted to leave myself a bit of wriggle room for June.
So no more than 20, is that?
That's our
A
current
fair way of
thinking.
putting it?
Yes,
Okay.
that's our current thinking.
All
Up
right.
to 20.
Okay. Okay, members, unless there's anyone else, we are recommended to note the report and the discussion. Do we agree to do so?
Yep.
Okay, that is agreed. Item 8 is the London Assembly work programme, and there have been some tweaks to this, which we'll now distribute around the table, and then I'll ask Anastasia to introduce it.
Thank you, Chairman.
Hang on. If you can wait until it's been distributed, then.
Apologies.
Thank you.
Anastasia, over to you.
So may I start by thanking the chairs and indeed all of the members of the Assembly's committees for signing off the programme for May and for June. It goes without saying that this entire programme is fully owned and led by Assembly members. But what this paper allows us to do, and what my role has been to coordinate all of the different topic selections by the committees to very modestly allow us to see everything in the round, but more substantively also to make sure that we don't have any inadvertent potential overlaps over the next couple of months, that we can identify where there can be potential collaboration between committees, and also to see where, for the Assembly programme as a whole, there can be cross-cutting themes, and indeed how these can be carried through potentially throughout the rest of the year. Unless there is a request for me to do so, I will not go through all of the committees line by line, but I would like to note, please, that for the Transport Committee, there has been a request to tackle the bus and tram safety topic in May. Initially, the intention had been to tackle it in July, which means that this will be the first topic for the Transport Committee next month, followed by the topic that would have been in May, London's transport now and in the future for June. Obviously, this paper covers only those 2 months. With regards to topics for the rest of the year, this is still under discussion with the respective committees, and as and when those are firmed up, I will of course be updating this committee in regular quarterly updates. I'd be happy to take any questions on this at this stage.
Any member? We appear to be content with that. Thank you, Anastasia. So, members, can we approve the work programme for the Assembly's committees for May and June? Agreed. Okay. Item 9 is for noting. It's a compilation of all the work that the Assembly's done on the Grenfell Tower fire. There's quite a voluminous amount of material in there because the Assembly's been very, very busy on it. Unless any member has any questions on this, I'm proposing to take it as read. Assembly Member Berry, and then Assembly Member Deval.
I do, which is just, I mean, obviously this is good work that we've done. We've covered a range of topics. Obviously, phase 1 of the inquiry, the Grenfell Tower public inquiry, is due to make recommendations quite soon. The Fire Resilience Emergency Planning Committee are down to consider that. And then obviously phase 2 will start, and I think we should probably note as a committee the intention to look at phase 2 and revisit some of the wider issues around planning and regeneration housing and those kinds of things when that happens. And I can't quite see that commitment in this paper, and whether it's appropriate that the Assembly, that here in oversight we should resolve to keep an eye on that because we are the oversight committee.
Yeah, personally, I don't have any problem with that. I think phase 2 is going to take a significant period of time, possibly more than the next municipal year.
There's even a start date.
Yeah. Well, I've been told it'll be 2020 at the earliest. So I think we should note that, and I think as and when that starts, I think it would be appropriate to pick it back up again. Can we include that in the, or is it already in there? You're pointing at. Paragraph 4.14.
4.14, we only considered the outcomes of the first phase. I just think something
Yeah, if we can potentially amend that in the minutes to acknowledge that we will also keep a view on phase 2 and sort of a watching brief as and when it goes along. Are you content with that? I saw Assemblymember Duval as well.
No, it's fine. That point's been covered. It's ongoing work and how we pick it up.
Sure.
We'll do it in longer timescales.
Okay then, members. We're requested to note the work that's been carried out and the ongoing work of the Assembly committees. Do you agree to do that? Members? Thank you. Item 10 is the voter registration pilot project. This has gone through Bureau of Leaders. I'm proposing to take it as read unless members have questions. Agreed? Thank you. Item 11 is action taken under delegated authority. Again, I'm proposing to take that as read unless members have questions. Are you content to accept that report? Thank you, members. Item 12 is the work programme of the Oversight Committee. Can we note the report? Thank you. Item 13, which is normally the last item but isn't today, is the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled to be on the 15th of May 2019 at 10 o'clock in this room, subject to confirmation at the Assembly's calendar of meetings at the annual general meeting of the Assembly on the 2nd of May. Can we note that? Okay, item 14, any other business the Chairman considers urgent. I've been asked to include 2 papers, the first of which is on the restructure of the corporate management team, and the second one is on changes to the scrutiny team and the Chief Officer's response to that. So we'll take them in that order. The first one is the corporate management team, which is supplementary agenda item 1 in members' packs today. Mary, would you like to introduce the paper?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for agreeing to take these 2 supplementary papers. I think members have been aware that the corporate management team has been left in a state of a bit of flux since the departure of the last head of paid service, and vacancies that have arisen since Jeff left have been filled on the interim basis, waiting for, as it turned out, my arrival, and then some thinking about the corporate management team going forward. So this is what this paper lays out, which briefly is my intention to retain a structure of chief officer and 5 executive directors, one of whom, of course, is the executive director of the Assembly Secretariat, and then the other 4, and to make some changes to the respective roles and responsibilities of those executive directors. No changes to the executive director for the Assembly Secretariat. The creation of a new directorate called here Learning and Communities, bringing together the work that broadly focuses on a number of communities and individuals across London that need additional support, but that effect leaves the Resources Directorate as it is after the changes we've already made to HR, FM and IT, make some changes to Directorate of Development, Enterprise and Environment by taking out skills and bringing in culture, and then makes some small changes to housing and land. On top of that, Chief Officer plus 5, I then do propose in the interim only to have a 6th Executive Director, which I call Corporate Support, bringing together a number of teams that are currently scattered around the organisation, but in effect do serve the whole organisation, and I think would benefit from being together with some additional focus and attention given to them. But that I would fund that additional cost from the transformation programme because it in large part enables me to continue focusing on the transformation programme, as well as my work getting ready, of course, for the 2020 elections. They deliberately, so there is not very much direct knock-on effect down to the level of assistant director and teams, but there is some, principally to the role of assistant director for growth and infrastructure. It's laid out in this paper, where we do propose to delete that assistant director role, but enhance the assistant director role for strategy and intelligence. Those two roles currently, as it happens, are done by the same person. And there is some knock-on effect into some of the teams that we are planning to move between directorates. So coming out of here, depending on what the discussion is now, my hope is to be able to get on and conclude the design of the job descriptions for the executive directors and start recruitment to the two that are currently filled in the interim and to the one new one. And also then to start some formal consultation with the individuals whose jobs are materially affected and the teams whose jobs are materially affected. But I've said to them all, very happy to have some more informal discussion with them before moving to sort of a formal consultation. But that's the paper.
Okay, I've seen Assembly Members Copley and Devonish are in that order. Assembly Member Copley?
Yes, thank you, Mary. You said that the proposed changes to the Housing and Land Directorate were small, but I don't agree. I mean, I just quote from 4.6, the teams delivering our work on rough sleeping, supporting Londoners in the private rented sector and running our mobility schemes for London social tenants will be relocated to the Learning and Communities Directorate. I don't understand the rationale behind that. Could you set that out? Could you set out why you're proposing to take teams that directly relate to housing out of the Housing and Land Department?
Okay. I think I said relatively small as opposed to small. So I'm not underplaying the team. So this comes from a couple of the rationale comes from a couple of points. What I'm saying in the principles underpinning this restructure, that I want to get to a set of executive director roles that are doable roles. So at the moment they are of different scale in terms of the remit of the executive directors, and some of them, particularly housing and land and particularly development, enterprise and environment, are enormous roles. So part of this is saying actually we want a set of executive director roles that are doable.
Can I just refer that? It might be simply by the nature of the departments that some departments need to be bigger than others, and by setting out to try and just create departments of equal size, yes, you can end up with ridiculous sort of side effects in terms of teams not being properly joined up.
Yes. So it's not about them being equal, and it's not about producing side effects that are more disadvantageous than they are beneficial, definitely. But that is part of it, because also these executive directors need some capacity as well to play a part in the corporate leadership team. I think there is still too much silo working, where actually across the top, particularly, there needs to be much more connection. But the rationale is that actually our work to build homes for Londoners, one is incredibly important, and two is growing as we speak. So we're adding 18 roles to the Royal Docks team, which we've already come through this committee. We're adding 29 roles to the rest of housing and land. It's an area that is growing and growing. The work on rough sleeping and mobility, tenants' mobility and private sector landlords, sits well in housing, and I'm not saying it doesn't. But if we're going to create a directorate that also focuses on the more vulnerable people in London, where there are connections elsewhere, certainly I think people who find themselves sleeping rough need support from a number of different aspects, not just getting into accommodation. People who find themselves in the private rented sector often have issues around benefits and poverty and other issues. The tenants mobility programme at the moment sits with that team in Housing and Land. So the proposal is, and it's a proposal, I'm not saying this is set in stone clearly, but the proposal is to move that team whole across to this other directorate. And I think what to try and lay out in the paper here is that there are many places many of these teams can sit in the GLA. This is partly about the senior team making sure that actually all the connections across the GLA are made when they're needed, wherever teams sit. And you know, we can either stick with exactly what we've got and say that's set in stone, or we can explore, you know, other options for putting teams adjacent with each other's for benefits to Londoners. Now, I accept there's still some more work to be done to lay those out, but at the headline level of this paper, that's the proposal.
You said, I mean, you say here that there are valuable links to be made with community, social policy and health, and absolutely, particularly with rough sleeping, you know, there are many links, you know, many necessary links with, particularly with health. But surely these links already exist. I mean, and the rough sleeping team, for example, is working already with other teams in the GLA. Do you think those links are working well at the moment?
I think they could work better.
And have you consulted on this proposal yet with staff? So
I have not yet formally consulted with staff, and I think I make that clear in the paper. What I have done is, in fact, the team we are talking about in Housing and Land, I went to see all of them last Wednesday or Thursday morning and had a discussion with them. What I have said to them that is after I've got through this meeting with Oversight Committee, assuming moving forward on all of these fronts in parallel, I will go back to them for a more detailed discussion before a move to a formal consultation. There are a number of teams, they're not the only one, there are a number of teams who find themselves in that situation.
And what are you going to be consulting with external stakeholders as well? Because, you know, particularly the rough sleeping team will be working with organisations like Crisis, St Mungo's, the other rough sleeping charities. Are you going to be making an assessment of what their response would be to us moving that team from explicitly housing department into another department?
I wouldn't normally intend to do that for an internal reorganisation. Because you know, this is part of how we organise internally. If you would like me to do that as part of this, then I'd be happy to. But I wouldn't routinely do it.
I think it would be worth taking a steer from them, because, you know, they're sort of, well, they're key delivery partners. And just in terms of sorry, going back to the point about the workloads, I think is it were, the executive directors, could this be solved in a different way, for example, by restructuring assistant directors and things like that to provide more support to executive directors?
Possibly. But this is about, you know, this restructure is not looking at increasing the cost of the senior management team.
Okay. All right, no further questions, Chair, but just to put on record that I'm extremely concerned about this.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. I've got two other members and then I've got some questions myself. So, in order, Assemblymember Devenish?
Well, Assemblymember Copley and I, for once, agree 100%. I'll probably be a bit blunter than him, though, and I apologise in advance. I do feel that you've answered this question, Mary, on classic internal facing process rather than the strategic direction of the mayor and the GLA. And rough sleeping, if you come to any of, Assembly Member Berry and Copley and I spend a lot of time discussing, quite rightly, rough sleeping in our housing meetings. And when I listened to you, I almost felt like, why do we bother? Because there's got to be some joined up nature between what the Assembly look to scrutinise the mayor on and what the mayoral team look to do. And I wrote down two questions and Assemblymember Copley asked them both, and I don't think you answered them. The first of all is why you're doing this, and I'd like you to go away and reflect, because clearly you haven't got the answer now, and come back to us, please. But I really would ask you to take the guidance that Assemblymember Copley very articulately set out, which is why you may want to re-look at this, inverted commas, underline. And secondly, in terms of did you consult, I would have thought you'd have probably have come to the chair of the Housing Committee who's sitting opposite me, or the deputy chair who asked you the question, or any of us, because this is the first I read of this when I read this paper, and I just think it just doesn't fit within the context of what this mayor, and I'm not here to advocate what this mayor wants to do, of course, but it doesn't fit within the context of what the housing team and what the deputy mayor's been saying to us for nearly 3 years. I'm flabbergasted, frankly, that you seem to have purely put this in the process of a member of staff, or be a senior member of staff within your team, rather than this enormously important part of the housing remit. So I'll just ask you to please go away and think about it, because I think you are completely on the wrong track. Thank you.
Okay. I think I might take Assemblymember Berry first, and you can maybe wrap up.
Okay.
Assemblymember Berry.
As you suspect, I've a similar point to make. I echo what Assemblymember Copley says, but also add another aspect to this. And what I'm worried about is that you've said that Housing and Land team will be focused entirely on building homes, and you've taken the part that relates to the most vulnerable people into the learning and communities sector. And I think that really fails to appreciate the fact that one of the major gaps in our policy at the moment is that we are too siloed in focusing on building brand new homes. Separately from that, we are mopping up at the bottom around helping the most vulnerable and rough sleepers. But there's this whole bit in the middle, the space between the building brand new homes and looking after the most vulnerable, which is where the most creative connections and ideas are missing and can be brought in. And there are signs of this at the moment within Housing and Land. So the capital letters scheme sits right in that space, doesn't it? So that's getting homes for long-term rent for people who can pay rent, who've become homeless because of things like being served a Section 21 notice from private landlords under a long-term lease. So we're not talking about building new homes there, we're not talking about providing homes for people. It's about the acquisition of existing homes into spaces where we need to create people's security of housing. Things like meanwhile use, if you're just focusing people on building homes, then opportunities for the meanwhile uses of the sites that are being built might be missed. Creative ways to build things outside the current market are, again, in that space, community-led housing. Yes, it's about building new homes, but it's not just about that. It could be about acquiring other homes. So if you see what I mean, there's this whole bit that I think we're already getting to the point of criticising the GLA for being too siloed on delivering new homes. And again, as an assembly, we scrutinise, we focus a lot on delivering the numbers. But delivering real security of housing to Londoners needs more creativity. And so putting these two things that are either end of the spectrum in separate directorates and leaving no space for the other thing to be done, I don't think is potentially correct. That said, I do think the rest of the reorganisation makes a lot of sense. And I have a question about scrutiny, effectively. You've not said here how each of the directorates would map onto the responsibilities of the deputy mayors. And if this is going to come back again for more discussion, I think that would be really useful to be able to see. And then in terms of mapping onto assembly committees, I can see a bit of a problem here if things are being reorganised. I mean, particularly in the housing team, as we were talking about. If we're in the final year of the mayoral term trying to scrutinise the mayor's delivery, and we've got a set of people who've just taken over responsibility for things that we might want to question, who then can't tell us what went wrong before, and the people who are responsible for what went on up to now, we may not even have the ability to call because that's not their job anymore. I just wanted to ask that you might be able to help smooth over any difficulties that might be in transition in terms of scrutinising, because this final year we are scrutinising delivery much more than we are discussing possibilities with officers.
Okay, Mary, would you like to respond to all of those points?
Yeah, so I'll take the last one first. So there are no plans to make any changes to deputy mayor responsibilities. coming out of this restructure.
That wasn't my question.
The point that Assembly Member was making, though, is how this proposed structure maps onto the deputy mayoral responsibilities, because it's not clear the link between the two. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I meant. So if somebody's, I can do a little map if that's helpful, but you know, if we were to go ahead with changes to housing and land, James Murray would remain deputy mayor of Rough Sleeping, even if it had moved. That was the point I'm making, really. But we can map that across. In terms of your point about so in terms of ongoing scrutiny of deputy mayors through this remaining year, that shouldn't change, because they won't be able to say that's no longer my responsibility, because their responsibilities aren't changing.
We also scrutinise the executive director.
Yeah, no, coming on to them. But so in terms of the deputy mayors, there would be no change. In terms of executive directors, the next step is to go out for permanent recruitment to those that are in interim roles. That's not everybody. Although I would like to get on with that now, that's going to take a while. So I don't think there'll be any short-term changes of personnel. But as and when there is, I'll provide some support there, because as you say, it's not we can't have people saying, well, actually I can't report to you on that because I wasn't in the job 3 months ago. I take that point. On the housing and land proposal, I hear what all three of you have said, and I'd like to talk to you more about it. They're only headline proposals. I do think there are some benefits of bringing together our work on people, which I think does reflect to some extent the mayoral priorities, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. However, I do accept that things, work as they are at the moment, and there is a reluctance to change that. But equally, I think there's time and space to have that discussion, because the executive director for the housing and land is a permanent appointment. That's not one I'm looking to go and redesign now. There are a couple of teams in here, the growth and infrastructure team, that actually, in effect gets pulled in two directions. And so I've had some conversations with them, and there's ongoing work to be had with them. Although I've had a message this morning from the two ADs there saying actually they think there's something quite reasonable that can be done to meet everyone's requirements there. So we need to look at this one in more detail, and I will look at it in more detail. I hear what you say.
Okay. I've got a few questions myself before we move forward. First one, sticking with the housing and land issues. You said you met the team last Wednesday, that was the 3rd of April. And the report is a late paper, so it wouldn't be subject to the normal 1 week in advance publication. The report was circulated on Thursday. Did you get feedback from the housing and land team about your proposals before the paper was issued?
I had the meeting with them before it was issued.
So what was their feedback? I'm assuming they spoke in the meeting. What was their feedback?
Yes, well, they don't want to move, is their feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you had anything in writing from them?
Well, they did send me something in writing on Tuesday of last week, but I didn't get it. So.
Okay. Have you seen it since?
I haven't seen it since, but I've said to them I will go back and see them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's written feedback, because the thing is, given the disquiet the members have got, I think members will probably want to see that.
Yes.
Yes, I'm happy to share it with members, yeah. It was sent to my secretary, but she didn't give it to me, so I ended up going to the meeting without it. But they know I haven't had it and why. But
okay.
I suspect they'll want to develop it further, in fact, but I'm happy for you to see what I had from them.
All right. I'll come back to that, because I might have an impact on both sides do. Right, moving forward on some of the other things. Paragraph 4.7, this is a question I asked you in the call over, Mary, about giving the Director of Housing and Land a more coordination role over the functional bodies and the housing that they deliver. So that makes, I think, on the face of it, perfect sense. The question I asked you at the call over, which I'll ask you again now, is what the views of Transport for London, the OPDC and the LDC have on that, and what specific remit and power the Director of Housing and Land will have to actually oversee that in any kind of meaningful way.
So I think this is something that the Chief of Staff is thinking about. My understanding is there's a first meeting of all the housing leads next week or the week after for an initial discussion.
Okay, so that'll be a chat, but the coordination role, as I see it, it makes perfect sense. But as I say, based on past experience, certain functional bodies don't play well with others. No. And giving someone the responsibility to do things without the power to do it would be a bit like giving someone no teeth. So what are we going to get from the Chief of Staff? Are we going to receive reassurance that David Luntz, or whoever's in that role, will actually have the power to direct or not?
Well, I think that's still to be discussed.
Okay, I think that's something I might want to come back here just so that we know.
Yeah.
Moving on to the position of Executive Director of Corporate Support, which is a new position you're proposing for 18 months. What's the reason for the timescale there?
Well, so the transformation programme, so stepping back, I've always thought that the Chief of Staff role, and I did the same when my last two Chief Executive roles, needs to earn her money, and so won't just sit on top of a set of executive directors, but will take on other responsibilities. So I've taken on HRIT and FM already, and would probably think about a broader set of responsibilities going forward. But with a transformation programme now designed and signed off and underway, and preparation for 2020 gearing up as we speak, I also need to be realistic about what I can take on and do well. So that is broadly the thinking behind that timing.
Okay. So are you proposing this is a fixed term contract position?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes.
And are you proposing to recruit this externally?
Well, I think that my proposal is to put it out with the other two at the same time and seek both external and internal expressions of interest.
Okay. The next question is paragraph 4.2, and it's the additional support for the fire and resilience for the Deputy Mayor for fire and resilience. And again, it's the same question that I asked you privately. You're proposing 2 new policy/business admin roles. What are these people going to do?
So the first will in effect be a head of team role, supporting. I know she's absented herself now, but supporting the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience. She's got a team of 3 or 4 underneath her already, but it's a team she's in effect directing herself, and she hasn't got any sort of overarching leadership in that team. In contrast to the Deputy Mayor for Transport, who has quite a substantial transport team under Tim Steer, supporting him, her, and her work with Transport for London. So when you step back and look at the two, there is a sort of an inequality, lack of symmetry there in terms of the structure. So one would be a head of team person. The other would be supporting on policy. So there's a performance role in there already. There are the resilient cities roles in there already. The Deputy Mayor has a mayoral advisor role and a PA, but doesn't have anybody helping develop policy in collaboration with the fire brigade. And so that would be the other role.
Yeah. I'm going to repeat what I said to you when we discussed this in private, because there isn't a substantial difference between Deputy Mayor for Fire and being Chairman of the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, and having done that role with one researcher, I'm struggling to see why the Deputy Mayor for Fire needs several. Not completely convinced by what you've just said to me, because it was not particularly specific. As I understand it, the Deputy Mayor for Fire has APA, has Jyoti, who I think is her policy advisor, also has Richard Berry, who's moved there from the Secretariat to work for her. Frankly, I would be struggling to see what all these people are going to be doing, because she's got an entire fire brigade. And I think the comparison between the Deputy Mayor for Transport and the Deputy Mayor for Fire is not a particularly helpful one, because Transport has got a lot more moving parts than Fire.
Well, it has a much bigger team.
Well, indeed,
Than this one
and you would
proposed.
expect it to, because there's a lot more involved in it. The other thing which gives me some cause for concern is paragraph 6.3, which I'll quote. The management of the fire and resilience team could be funded from savings generated through the proposed redistribution of the responsibilities of the Assistant Director of Growth and Infrastructure. That leaves one further role in the fire and resilience team, which the Chief Officer proposes to fund from 18-19 underspends initially ahead of the 2021 budget setting process. Well, that means budget growth, and that means it's an unfunded post, which sounds unsustainable to me. And bearing in mind the exchange you had with Assembly Member Prince earlier on about 4-year funding for new positions, or for positions that have been converted from fixed-term contract to permanent, I wondered if you might like to comment on that.
Well, so I think there are two issues there. I think the assistant, if we take out, as is proposed, the role of Assistant Director of Growth and Infrastructure, that will more than cover one further role in the fire and resilience team.
Yeah, that's understood. I mean, we've made that clear
so
in
the
the
question
paper.
is the shortfall, and I think we need to do some. We haven't worked up the job descriptions and done the grading yet. If we can't fully cover the two from the current fire and resilience team budget, then we won't be able to make it a permanent role. No, you're right, because that would have to be fixed term pending the budget. But I think we have to look at the respective. I mean, I don't see the head of team fire and resilience role being at the level of Assistant Director of Growth and Infrastructure. But the question is whether we can get the two roles out of that rather than just one and 3/4.
Yeah, I mean, that might be something that can be worked up. Speaking on principle, I'm very uncomfortable approving a structure that doesn't have funding attached. The point of the financial implications section is to explain how you're going to pay for it, and you haven't.
Well, I've explained how I'm going to pay for one of them.
Well, yes, indeed, but you haven't done it. So I'm uncomfortable personally approving it on that basis. Look, I mean, given some of the concerns that there are around the housing and land proposals expressed by members on all sides, my proposal at the moment will be to defer this paper until the next meeting.
Yeah, agreed.
I think there are some parts we could agree. I think the two issues that we've raised during the debate, I think, are worthy of delay, and the rest of the thrust of the paper, I think, is not covered by those points. I mean, I do think there's an interesting point you made about the fire issues, and it was always going to be a problem, I think, with the separation of the political executive from the fire delivery issues. You've got to think in terms of MOPAC rather than Deputy Mayor Transport or whatever, because TfL is still a separate body. Fire was coming into the organisation, and it'll be worthy if you defer that point to see some of the issues in the legislation, which you'll be familiar with, Gareth, about what's the justification of why are people like Richard Berry needed in terms of what's the onus that's put on the Mayor's office rather than the fire department.
Yeah, I think.
And so I think on that, and then certainly in terms of the housing issues, I think some points have been well made, and it needs to be explored fully. And I think on the others, so I'm up for deferring those two parts, but on the rest of the direction of travel, would you? I mean, I think in terms of the concerns, they haven't been raised unless people are going to raise them now.
Well, I think. So, given the housing and land is such a big part of the overall restructure, that's because I did think of that. Maybe we could hold that back, and but I'm wondering whether I don't know how the rest of it stacks up if you take that bit out. And a simpler thing might be to take the entire paper back.
You're very fortunate to have 3 members of the Housing Committee, Karen and future chair. Other committees might well have things to say that we've had this since Friday, and we've not been able to consult our group members and all of that. So it would be a good idea to look at it again.
To pause it and bring it back.
Yeah.
I mean,
Chair, should I just echo that point and suggest maybe Mary should take it to all chairs of committees to make sure or one of her people should, because clearly it's a major point that if we're not happy with this housing point, we don't know if perhaps transport can speak for transport. As we've got transport here as well, but we'd have to go around every committee, and maybe Mary can do that.
Hang on, because the Oversight Committee exists to take papers such as this. I think some consultation of other committees might be useful.
That's why we need extra time.
But I think at the very minimum, it needs to come back here again. Because there are some things that we've asked for that we haven't got at the moment, so feedback from the Housing and Land team, that sort of thing, I think would benefit by seeing. On the fire thing, personally I'd like to know how additional posts are going to be funded. So the proposal was to defer until June, and that's in consultation with the Deputy Chair, who by then will be the Chair, subject to that being confirmed at the AGM at the beginning of May. Are members content to do that? The AGM's in May. The next meeting is the Oversight, so the first meeting of the Oversight Committee then will be in May.
Am I right in thinking one of the posts is funded?
Well, what Mary has proposed is that by deleting one of the assistant director posts in another directorate, that could be paid. That could pay for the more senior position of fire.
Yeah.
But the more junior position, it's unknown at the moment whether there'll be sufficient funds in the budget to pay for it.
Yeah, I'm just reluctant to delay extra support for fire when
Some of
it can be paid for.
I don't want to approve a paper that creates an unfunded post.
No, but I'm just thinking, if one of them is funded, can we not give indication that could be recruited or not?
Well, it depends if the rest of the paper gets approved.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's all interconnected, that's the trouble.
Yeah.
Chair, can I look at the report? So I can see there are things that you would like to come back with more detail, and of course I will do that. I would like to do that in May rather than in June.
Yeah, May. Sorry, that was my mistake.
Yeah, that would be good. However, there are some important gaps in the executive, in the corporate management team and in the corporate management team's support. I think the only thing that I've heard some, considerable pushback against is the changes to housing and land. If we weren't to do that, that would mean no changes to housing and land, and would mean the learning and communities piece didn't have that team but had everything else. And I do need to get on with, designing these executive director roles and getting out to recruitment. I also do need to get on with designing the support to the executive directors, because our support needs remodelling. My proposal is that I get on with that work. I wouldn't have got very far. I wouldn't have appointed people or anything like that by the time I see you in May. But really, if I'm going to get this recruitment done before the summer break, because of course that's when a lot of people then aren't available for recruitment, I really do need to kickstart it now. But I think I can do that while not closing down any options and absolutely not closing down the concerns that have been raised.
Members, how do we feel about that?
I'm minded to agree with you, Chair.
Well, the Head of Paid Services, Chief Officer, has offered a compromise, which is that she is permitted to continue with everything with the exception of housing and land and fire. So get the ball rolling on those things in advance of the next meeting, and then bring back the other issues for consideration at that meeting. Do members agree with that?
Yeah. Sort of continuing to develop rather than go ahead.
Well,
Yes.
well, I won't. Yeah, there are things I must now put in place, which I want to carry on putting in place. I wouldn't have made any decisions by the time we meet next, but I want to get on with quite a lot of the work underpinning it.
Members? All right. So the suggestion, therefore, is that Mary continues with that without any decisions being put into place. This paper will come back with additions to it, specifically around housing and land and fire, aiming to answer the questions that members have made, including any correspondence there's been between the Housing and Land Directorate and you on your proposals. Are we content with that? Right. Subject to that, is that approved? Thank you very much, members. Okay. So the final paper for today is it's the proposed changes to the scrutiny team. It's the Chief Officer's response to the paper that was brought to us at our last meeting. Mary, would you like to introduce this?
Yes. So this is my last paper for today. At your last meeting, you heard from Anastasia about the scrutiny restructure, and I raised a concern at the time with the fact that we're building into the structure a span of control of 14 members of staff reporting to one manager. I agreed then that if I wanted to sort of pursue that concern, I would come back to this committee. So this very short paper lays out the fact that actually I do think we should not be building in structures anywhere in the GLA. It's not about the Assembly, but anywhere in the GLA where we have 14 people reporting directly to one manager. I think the span of control is too great. And also, as I'm coming in here, I'm trying to make sure that we, that we become the exemplary employer that the Mayor is asking us to be. And some of that is related to a lot of things we've been talking about today, but it's also related to, the relationships between managers and people they manage, and the expectations we set on managers for the time and focus they spend with the people that they manage, and vice versa. I also think that this restructure, as we said last time, is a difficult one, partly because the team has been untouched for, I think we said 19 years at the last meeting. And I really do feel very strongly that we should give the structure and the team leading the team, and Anastasia in particular, best possible chance of success. So I understand why in the structure there's a reluctance to give certain roles managerial responsibility, which is why one job ends up with 14 direct reports. And so I've spent some time with Ed and Anastasia and with Martin, seeing what the possibilities might be. And I am very strongly recommending to you that you do introduce another grade 10 role into the structure, because it's my professional opinion as head of paid service that of all the options, that is the best way of doing it. I know it feels it's come late into the discussion, and I'm making sure that going forward I'm fully engaged with Assembly restructures so that this doesn't happen again. But I think actually the neatest way through this is the addition of another grade 10 structure and grade 10 post into the structure. I think it's affordable, as I've laid out in this paper, but that is my strong recommendation to you.
Okay, I've seen Assembly Member Deval.
I note the reason why you want to put it. I mean, I would say this, in the previous paper, it looks like you've got at least 10 people reporting to you. So on the basis of those issues, this consistency might be, even though it might be a temporary period of time, you've got. The issues here is the speed of which we appoint. I'm not so clear that we need to rush into this process in terms that's outlined in 4.4, but I think we should have it part of the armoury in the toolbox, do you know what I mean, and appoint sometime in the future. Equally, I think we need to change the recommendations to see we've had in this organisation 300 and plus, some temporaries converted to that, 300 odd posts required, and budget submissions have been made. Here we're saying the Assembly should have to fund it itself. So I think we should prepare a future budget submission for this particular post to bring us into line with the rest of the GLA. I think we're being treated differently in terms of the Secretariat is being treated differently than the rest of the organisation. We've had no new posts. I think that's quite important. I think I could come up with a few on the political side. We heard earlier on, I think we could come up with a few in the Secretariat side if we don't, but we've not encouraged that, I think it's fair to say, on the Assembly. In fact, the review was done within the constraints of the existing resources, because we might have done it differently. So I think in that sense, I think certainly we should be putting a budget submission for the next budget to bring this into the establishment and not maintain it out of the existing budget of where we are on that like-for-like basis. But, you know, I do think it's an important principle about spanner command and what you say. I recognise that. I do question about when is the right time to appoint to this and the thinking around that. But, you know, nevertheless, it's an additional resource. But I think we should be treated the same as the rest of the organisation.
All right, I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Berry, who I've seen, and now give Mary the chance to answer. Assembly Member Berry.
I think, I mean, this is quite a pragmatic response to the concerns that we had about line management. I'm looking at the flow chart thing from last time's papers, where you've got that operations manager at grade 10 with 14 grade 8s, but also a grade 4, so that's 15 people
15,
below. And it does make some sense to split the management if, as set out in the paper, the goal is not to have the senior policy advisors who are grade 10s doing line management. And that's something we discussed last time, and obviously that's your thinking is clear on that. My question is about the research function, because obviously one of the goals of this was to have research people that we could draw on as individual assembly members, as groups, as well as committees, to ask for information and analysis to be provided to us. And if you're now splitting that operations manager, which I think you're calling research and operations manager in your paper, into 2 posts, or adding an extra post, 4 of the grade 8s are research analysts and 10 are policy advisors. So, I mean, would it be the case that one of those people would be more research management focused, and that would be our point of contact if we wanted research done? I mean, is that kind of part of the management thoughts, as well as the line management and HR functions?
So that will be for Anastasia to decide, in my view, if you agree this second post, because it's her structure. I was more concerned around the principles of how many people are managed and the standards then of leadership and management. That would be up to Anastasia. So I haven't defined that in this paper.
You haven't. That's why I'm asking.
And deliberately so.
Okay.
Deliberately so. I mean, I think there are a number of ways you could do it, but I'm not best placed to make that decision.
And my second question was about the unison response that we looked at last time, which I think you'd not had full sight of when we discussed it last. This is one of the points that was made in the unison response. Will we see the full response to the unison queries, the other ones, as well as the one we brought up ourselves?
We're going to have to defer.
Yeah.
Certainly, yes. Very happy to send that on.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're right. This was one of them, and actually,
Yes,
I hadn't seen the response at the time, but there were a number of others, weren't there, which I know there have been lots of discussions about.
Assembly Devonish.
My point is more a cultural issue, and it slightly picks up. I agree with everything that A.M. Duval said. You know, we are different. We are the London Assembly. We are here to scrutinise the Mayor and the GLA. And I think just putting an extra post almost as a way of, it's rather like your answer with great respect to the housing points. It's a process solution rather than we need a changing culture, that the whole officer team are working with Anastasia to support us on the committees to scrutinise the Mayor and the GLA. And I don't think just coming up with a new post every time is the way of doing that. I'd much rather hear from Anastasia what she wants, rather than you just propose, because a certain number of direct reports have reached more than you consider from your point of view, Mary, that she decides what she needs in a more flexible, which is part of the restructuring that's ongoing at the moment. So again, I think it's a bit almost cart before the horse in terms of what you're proposing here, and I would actually rather hear from Anastasia rather than you propose this.
Well, so just so we're clear, because I don't think you were at the last meeting, I did propose this over and above what Anastasia was proposing, because to some level, actually, this is a process point. This is about span of control for this particular role. So this, I would argue the rough sleeping one isn't a process point, but I need to convince you of that. This one is to some extent exactly that. And so I've had lots of conversations about, where else how would you get away from that one person looking after 15 And as Assemblymember Berry has said, there are other people you could give managerial responsibility to, but those are completely counter to what Anna Cecile was trying to achieve. And I've accepted that's, you know, that would have been one way to do it, actually without any extra post. But that is completely counter to the rationale, which is why I've ended up with this particular proposal.
You do accept the London Assembly, though, as an organisation, has a different purpose to much of the Mayor and the GLA.
Yes, of course I do. Of course I do. But I sit here as head of paid service across the whole organisation.
Yeah, but I do go back to the point that A.M. Duval made earlier, which was absolutely right. We are often bluntly seen, this is not a party political point, we all agree with this, as a second-class part of the organisation. And I think we can't just have a process solution that works in one place, perhaps, just push somewhere else. But I'll leave it there.
I'm going to return again, Mary, to a point that I made when we discussed this privately, and also a point which I raised at the last meeting following your intervention, which is how we pay for an additional position. The recommendation that we had at the last meeting was the recommendation made by the Assistant Director and the Director. And as is your right as the Head of Paid Service, you've taken a different view, and you've recommended an additional post be recruited, but there's no way of funding it. So you've suggested, and the language is very loose here, it is thought, using our standard budgeting approach, that circa 52,000 can be saved, which could be contributed, but you've acknowledged that it would be a £67,000 commitment for 1920, and it then increased by cost of living pay increases for the financial years beyond 1920. But there is no suggestion of how to pay for that. So again, we're right back where we were in the last item. We're approving posts that we haven't got funding for. And I personally find that very difficult to do, particularly given that we're going against the recommendations of the Assistant Director and Director of the area responsible. Would you like to comment on that?
Martin will go first.
Can I say that this paper is recognising what I call, for 2021, a financial pressure. And to pick up the Deputy Chair's comment, I see as part of my role as being, the Chief Finance Officer for the GLA, is to work to resolve that and resolve it that delivers the necessary funding. Why I can't say that totally explicit in the paper, because ultimately it's not my decision, but it seems in the scale of things it is a pressure, a financial pressure that should be readily solved in the budget process.
But that's not good enough, is it? Because this is coming about as a result of an intervention very late in a process that's almost completed 3 weeks ago, and an urgent paper has been taken to this committee and it doesn't answer one of the key questions. I don't think it's good enough to bring it to the Assembly, asking the Assembly to approve it without the financial package attached.
I agree with that, but it's the fact that we're now in April, I cannot give you unequivocal assurance that the funding will be there next April.
Well, then I don't think we should approve the paper.
Like many, across the piece in developing the budget for the Mayor and Assembly next year, to be many pressures to address, to be efficiency savings, the sort of all part of the usual process. And what I'm saying is on the scale of things, to me, I don't see this as a difficult challenge. I accept the principle.
Well, that's fine.
It's not
but
funded
then
in
the paper that's presented to members for approval today should have a funding solution attached, and it doesn't, and that's not good enough. It's very easy for you to say that, I'm sure it won't be a big challenge. Of course it will. In a budget of £18 billion, I'm sure you can find an extra £20,000 to fund the post. But the point is, you haven't, and the paper is in front of us today.
But it's not my decision to decide that funding. That's what I'm saying is, but I can work to find the funding, but it's not my decision to find the funding.
No, that's fine. This is not meant to be about
Assembly next
this is not meant to be about you, Martin. I'm talking about the process here. So we had an intervention at the 11th hour of a process that had taken several months that recommended something different, an add-on, a new post, which represents a growth bid after the budget has already been set for the financial year, which will have knock-on effects for future financial years, and there is no funding solution attached in the paper. That is bad process. I mean, I'm looking at you at the moment, but it's a collective criticism I'm making, and I don't feel obliged to support that. I think that is materially bad. We heard earlier on when it came to the paper about converting fixed-term posts to permanent posts, unless there was a 4-year funding solution attached, you wouldn't be doing it. Assemblymember Prince asked some very clear questions of the Chief Officer and got clear answers. Here, I'm getting grey at the best. The best description I give is grey. Personally, I don't feel inclined to support this unless we either come up with a funding solution, which means delaying this paper and bringing it back, or we agree that we make it fixed term on the basis that you can find the money this year, and then we bring it back and reconsider whether we make it a permanent post after the funding is attached. Members?
Is there any point in making it fixed term? For we've heard that it's the same as being a normal employee anyway.
Well, I think with a fixed term post, if it's a 12-month fixed term post, then we can find the funding to fund it for 1 year, and then the post can go ahead, and it doesn't leave us open to having an unfunded post in future financial years, or it gives them time to find the funding going forward.
What happens at the end of the 12 months? Do they get made redundant?
As long as under a year.
Unless they find...
then what's the difference?
How much do you think redundancy pay is?
Substantial results. Can I just say one way we've done it in a certain London borough is we basically said it's approved subject you could find the savings elsewhere in your restructuring.
The other alternative, I mean, we're 12 months from an election, which may very well lead to a restructure anyway. If it is found that in the space of this 12 months that this post is needed, we can revisit then. Or we can approve it now, but we're approving it now without funding, which I think is bad practice, and I won't vote for that.
Agreed.
Look, I think we're in a difficult process, but equally by deferring the paper, as long as we don't stop the rest of the review, I think it's quite clear the rest of the review goes on. But actually, it is Mary's decision, and we can defer, but she can proceed to say, I want to go ahead. My own view is about the timing of this appointment. I'm very clear about that. I think in terms of the issues of funding this post, I think are a bit like you, Chair. I'm shrugging my shoulders as we nudge and fudge all the way through. But I'm very clear this is a growth bid in future years, and we should be treated like the others. In fact, what should really happen is, and I can see why we don't need to go to it because we'd have to get Mayor's permission. We should go into the General Reserve, and they should be funding this if Mary wants to do it and proceed now, not coming out from our budgets because of the 11th hour issue. It should be funded by the General, because that's what happens with all the other 300 odd posts that have been agreed. They haven't been picked up, and departments haven't been made to take ownership of those. There's very substantial growth in those issues. And so I just want to be treated the same as everyone else. I don't want to stop the review. I want to get on. But if that is the way forward, that's where it should be. I don't think we should be carrying this with our own budget. Now, as you said rightly, Chair, we might be in future budgets looking at other issues and other choices around where that budget is prioritised within the London Secretariat and between the Secretariat and the London Assembly. But the question for me is, I might be able to do it, but I think there's some caveats I'm trying to impress upon Mary in terms of the way forward. That I don't see this as the immediate criteria. Unless Anastasia tells me I must have this post from day one, I think the question is we've got to get on with the review and the core bits of the review. That's the key issue, keeping the show on the road. And then, as I said, it's an additional resource. Who would not turn down additional resource? Mary has made a very good case about SPAN. I've made it back equally about other parts of the organisation. And if we're going to get consistent about it, we need to think about that. But in that sense, mine's about the timing of this resource, if we get it and when we get it and how it's used.
I think the Chief Officer's paper makes clear that the wider restructure will proceed regardless. And I think that's a concern we can sort of lay to rest. I think really it's a question about, do we want to approve a post that doesn't have funding attached?
That may be partially helpful. If there was a shortfall in 1920, I have no difficulty in finding corporate resource to meet that shortfall. My problem for 2021, and why it's probably different to a London Borough, this expense will show in the Assembly component budget. So it's that will need to grow.
Yeah, look, I don't doubt that you can pay for a post in the full financial year, because it's a tiny amount of money in the overall sweep of the budget, and there'll be underspends around the building that you can utilise for that. My personal problem
Yeah.
is approving a position that is unfunded.
Yeah.
You know, when you approve posts, you have to be able to pay for them. It has to be in your base budget, otherwise it's an unsustainable position. This is not in the base budget, and I think the process hasn't been followed in the way that it should. I think it should have happened much sooner in the process if we're going to do this. We've only just set the budget for the financial year, and we're getting this after the event. And on that basis, I won't support this. I mean, other members may take a view. What I think we're going to do is take a vote on it. Those who are in favour of approving the paper as drafted, could you please show? Nobody. Those against? Okay, the paper falls. Mary, I believe, does have the right to proceed anyway, but she'll do it without the approval of the Oversight Committee. Okay, members, there are no other items on the agenda, so the meeting is closed.
GLA Committee Room 5, Sound.